Hello Year 11 and welcome to the second video on how to answer the exam questions for OCR History B for the Elizabethans 1580 to 1603. So for the Elizabethan paper, you will have one 3-mark question, one 5-mark question, one 12-mark question, and then you will have two 20-mark questions of which you have a choice between which one you would like to answer. So you only select one of the 20-mark questions, and obviously you will pick the one that you think is the best one to answer. Okay, Year 11, so for your first question, which will be worth 3 marks, you will always be given an interpretation. So a quick note here on the fact that an interpretation is something that has been produced after the time being studied. So in this instance, it is a document that has been produced after the Elizabethan era, making it an interpretation. We're told that this has been written by historian Antonia Fraser, and the question says, in interpretation A, historian Antonia Fraser argues that Mary Queen of Scots was treated unfairly at her trial. Identify and explain one way in which she does this. In the exam, we would expect you to highlight or underline or circle the element that the exam board are looking for you to pick out from the question. So here, it's the idea that Mary Queen of Scots is being treated unfairly at her trial. I'd always suggest that you break down the question before reading the interpretation so that you know what it is that you are looking for when you are reading through it. So when we read through this together in a moment, we're looking for any ways that prove that Mary was treated unfairly. You'll then always be asked to identify and explain one way in which she does this. So the likelihood is that whatever the interpretation is that you are presented with, there will normally be a good few options that you could go for in terms of, in this instance, explaining how Mary was treated unfairly. But the examiners are not looking for a list of ways she was treated unfairly. They're looking for you to identify one and then explain that. So if we read through the interpretation together first of all, it says, interpretation A, the provenance then states, an extract from Mary Queen of Scots, a 1969 book by historian Antonia Fraser. So as I've said, it will always be an interpretation. It will always be after the time produced. It could be that you get an image in the exam. Obviously, in this instance, we have a written interpretation. It says, at the trial, Mary was allowed neither lawyer nor witness in her defence. She was not even allowed a secretary to help her prepare her own case, as her own secretaries were imprisoned in London. She was left totally alone, a sick woman and a foreigner who knew nothing of England, its laws or customs, and had only begun to learn its language comparatively later in life. She was left alone to conduct and manage her own defence against the best legal brains in the country. So that's the snippet that we've been given, and the way that we would address this is as follows. First of all, it would only be one short paragraph for the 3-mark question. You would be expected to make an inference about how Mary Queen of Scots was treated unfairly. So remember, an inference, something that we can work out from the interpretation, not something that it gives us, something that you can read between the lines in the interpretation and work out for yourself about the fact that Mary Queen of Scots was being treated unfairly. You would need a quote to support your inference for your 2nd mark, and then one sentence to explain this for your 3rd mark. So if you have a look at a couple of examples, you'll hopefully see that this is quite a simple response to write, and the exam board aren't expecting too much of you here. So Fraser depicts Mary as defenceless. So nowhere in this interpretation does it use the word defenceless. That is an inference predominantly from this point here. Okay, she had to manage her own defence. Okay, so we've made an inference here that she was defenceless as a result of that. The response then goes on to say, for example, she's described as quite alone, a sick woman, and then the explanation, this makes her seem vulnerable. So as much as we've said explanation, this doesn't have to be lengthy. It can be quite short, as we can see here. We can have a look at a second example. Fraser suggests that the prosecution and defence weren't evenly matched. So you can see here at the top that we've got at the trial, Mary was allowed neither lawyer nor witness in her defence. Okay, So you can see here that she is, as we've said, defenceless. She has not been able to bring lawyers with her. If we look at the bottom of the interpretation, we can see she was left alone to conduct and manage her own defence against the best legal brains in the country. So at the top of the interpretation, it says she's not allowed a lawyer, and then in comparison, the people that have put her on trial are the best legal brains in the country. And this leads us to infer that the prosecution and defence weren't evenly matched. We've then got quotes to support this. So Mary was quite alone in a foreign country, whilst the prosecution had the best legal brains in the country. And then we've got the explanation of this makes us feel sympathetic towards Mary, and that would be your 3rd mark. So you have 2 examples to have a look through there, but the key thing to remember with this question is that you must make an inference, you must use a quote to support that, and then just 1 sentence, which as we've said can be short, to explain that to get your 3rd and final mark. So question 1B will always be worth 5 marks, and it will always be about the same interpretation that you've already spoken about for question 1A. So the questions then will always be, if you were asked to do further research on one aspect of interpretation A, so it will always start with that bit. And by further research, this is where we are expecting you to use one of the 2nd order concepts. So your CCCS, so cause, consequence, change, continuity, comparison or significance. You're obviously familiar with these due to the public health exam and the Making of America exam, but we are using them here for question 1B for further research. So that start will always be the same. If you were asked to do further research on one aspect of interpretation A, what would you choose to investigate? There will then be something that the exam board would really like you to focus on. So here it says, explain how this would help us to analyse and understand the problems that Mary Queen of Scots caused Elizabeth. So we're looking for further research from the interpretation that we've just looked at on the problems that Mary Queen of Scots caused Elizabeth. So the way to answer this question would be 1 short paragraph, 1 sentence about the impression that you get from the interpretation. And please don't worry here that this is going to sound very similar to what you've said in your 3-mark question. So it's likely that there will be a bit of overlap here, but it's only a sentence and it's going to be the impression that you get from the interpretation. 1 sentence to explain what it is that you would investigate. Are you going to investigate a cause, a consequence, a change, continuity, a comparison, or significance? So you'd outline here what it is that you are going to investigate. And then a sentence to explain how this would help you to understand the topic in the question. So in this case, the question states the problems that Mary Queen of Scots caused Elizabeth. So this is what we would need to explain if we were to answer this question. So let's have a look at an example paragraph together. Interpretation A suggests that Mary was not much of a threat to Elizabeth because the interpretation states that Mary was a sick woman and a foreigner who knew nothing of England, its laws, or its customs, which would lead her to lose her trial. So at this point we are on 1 mark. We've summarised what's already been said really in question 1A. We've given the impression that Mary wasn't the biggest threat because, as we've said, she was quite defenceless. And we've given a quote to suggest how the interpretation does that. We then go on to say what we're going to investigate. So I would investigate the scale and significance of the Catholic threat in England at the time. So this would give us 3 marks. This would help us better understand why Mary was treated so harshly by Elizabeth when she appeared weak. And this would give us our 5th mark because we are explaining the problems that Mary Queen of Scots caused Elizabeth by looking at why Mary was being treated so harshly. So we've linked it back to the question. We've given a sentence to explain what we would investigate, and we've given our impression from the interpretation. So this 5-mark question is a little bit unusual in terms of the way that it's phrased, but it will always be phrased in the same way. And the key things here to remember are that you have to remember these steps in terms of how to compose your response. So 1 short paragraph, 1 sentence about the impression you get from the interpretation, one sentence to explain what you would investigate, and that key thing there is your CCCS, and then one sentence to explain how this would help you to understand whatever the topic is in the question that you have been given. So we then have the 12-mark question, and the 12-mark question will always give you two interpretations that you need to compare. So in this instance, the question reads, interpretations B and C both focus on daily life in Elizabethan society. How far do they differ, and what might explain any of these differences? So the way that we would address this question is that we would always have two paragraphs. Paragraph 1 is where you are going to compare the differences that you can see between the interpretations, and you must here use quotes to support this. If you are not using quotes or descriptions from the interpretation, then you are going to be stuck on 6 marks. So it is really, really important that you make sure that you are, yes, comparing them, but making sure that you use quotes to support the differences that you have identified between the two. In paragraph 2, this is where you are going to say why are these interpretations different, and this is where you need to analyse the provenance of the interpretations to explain why they have the viewpoint that they do. So it's worth again reminding us here that your provenance is your what, your where, your when, your who, and then you work out the why of the interpretation. So we will have a look at the provenance on the next slide, which has the two interpretations that both focus on daily life, but you need to analyse that provenance to explain why the two interpretations have the different viewpoints that they do. You will always be given two interpretations that do have a different viewpoint, because the question is how far do they differ. So they will always be noticeably different, which will help you greatly when you are trying to explain the differences between the two. Okay, so just a reminder of the question. The question is, interpretations B and C both focus on daily life in Elizabethan society. How far do they differ, and what might explain any differences? So in the exam, we would suggest that you read, annotate, highlight your two interpretations first of all, and we're trying to get an overall impression here of, normally it's going to be that one's positive and one's negative. And we are looking here for this focus on daily life. So let's have a look at interpretation B first of all. Okay, just a reminder that this bit here at the top that is in bold is your provenance. So we've got an image and extract from the website for Kentwell Hall in Suffolk. Kentwell Hall is a stately home where the public can pay to see recreations of daily life in Elizabethan times. So we've been told here that this is from a website, and we are being given an image and an extract, along with a little bit of information of what happens at Kentwell Hall. We can then see an image, and as much as I said on the previous slide that we would need quotes to support our differences, because we have an image, you are more than welcome to describe what that image shows. And then at the bottom, let's have a read through this extract, which is entitled Step Back in Time. So at Kentwell, our Tudor days are the biggest and most authentic Tudor experience you will get anywhere. Everywhere around you is the Tudor age. Relax into it and spend a day in the 16th century. Our Tudors recreate a whole Tudor community, the dress, speech, food, drink, music, dance, crafts, activities, pleasures and way of life. Visitors feel they have been transported back to a real 16th century community where everyone depended on and looked after each other. Okay, you've also been given a little bit of additional information at the bottom that says the Tudor period was the period 1485 to 1603, when the monarchs were all from the Tudor family, including Elizabeth I. So this is just for anybody that reads Tudor and thinks, why are they speaking to me about the Tudors rather than just Elizabeth I? Remember that we have looked at in our background lessons the fact that Elizabeth was part of the Tudor dynasty, but the exam would have helped us by giving us this bit of information here. I'm hopeful that even just from reading through this, we can see that this is quite a positive interpretation. Even without reading the extract at the bottom, you can see on the faces of the individuals that we've got smiling, they're holding hands. We've clearly got a positive atmosphere as part of this recreation. Let's have a look at interpretation C in comparison. So again, if we look at the provenance, which is this bit here at the top, it is an extract from a BBC history programme for secondary school students based on the book The Time Traveller's Guide to Elizabethan England by historian Ian Mortimer. So the first one, we have a website from a tourist attraction. Here we have a BBC history programme for secondary school students. So very different audiences for these two interpretations, which will be important to us. So the interpretation states, Elizabethan society is dominated by the rich and powerful, but this is a world enjoyed by a privileged few. For most people, life is very different. There is widespread poverty, and many people struggle to feed and house their families. The punishments for even the smallest crimes are harsh, and disease is everywhere. It has been known for some people feeling the symptoms of plague to simply wait for death. On arrival in any town, you'll be drawn instantly to the hustle and bustle of the market. Cooked meats, pies and pasties are all on offer, and so are tasty treats, but they are expensive. You might only stretch to buy some herbs or an onion to make a soup. And as the day ends, the town seems less friendly and safe. In fact, after dark, it's terrifying. Where there is poverty, there is often crime. Most young men carry a dagger. So again, I'm hopeful here that as we've read through that, we can pick up lots of negatives. So we have, it's terrifying, there's often crime, we've got men carrying daggers, we've got people struggling to feed and house their families. So here, clearly, Year 11, we have a very obvious difference on the fact that interpretation B has a positive focus on daily life and interpretation C has this negative impression. So for paragraph 1 then, we just need to say how these two interpretations are different. So you can see here I've broken down what we could say and where the marks are allocated. So B depicts daily life in a very positive way, showing us that life in Elizabethan England would have been enjoyable. The interpretation shows people dancing along to music and enjoying the pleasures of 16th century life. It states that everyone depended on each other, making Elizabethan life sound caring and welcoming. In comparison, C gives an overly negative impression of daily life, as life would have been extremely tough and harrowing. Now, at this point, we would be on 7 marks because we have made a comparison, but we're missing a quote at this point from interpretation C. So if we were to put full stop at that point, you would be on 7 marks. So we now need to back our comparison up with a quote. And we have, it emphasises hardship by stating you might only be able to buy some herbs or an onion, and states disease was a problem with many waiting for death. And that would draw us up to 9 marks. Now you can see here that I've put 2 quotes in the second part of my response. There's not a need to do that. I just thought that that made it sound a little bit more articulate, I guess, in terms of what I'd said about life being tough and harrowing. So the tough bit in terms of economic hardship, not being able to buy anything luxurious, only basics, and then harrowing because of the waiting for death. So there's no need for you to put 2 quotes, but you can see here the way that we would construct paragraph 1. So we're on 9 marks at this point. Remember, this is out of 12 marks, so just comparing the two and giving a quote for both of them could get to us up to 9 out of 12. But the top marks come from this paragraph here. Why are they different? And for that, we need to have a look at our provenance. So again, we can have a look at this bit now for what I've said for why they are different, and hopefully you'll be able to pick this up from looking back at the provenance. So B is more positive because it is from a website aimed at tourists, which is trying to attract people to visit Kentwell Hall. It's selling a visit as an authentic experience, but is more likely to focus on the pleasures and positive aspects of life, as mentioning disease and death would be unlikely to encourage families to visit. So this would be our 12 marks. We have picked out that the reason that they differ is because B is there to attract people to Kentwell Hall. C is there just to inform. We don't even have to write that here. What we have to pick out is the fact that B gives these positives because it is always going to focus on the pleasures and positive aspects of life, to attract people to come to this tourist attraction of Kentwell Hall. So a paragraph as short as that just focuses on why the interpretations are different, what was their overall aim, and we can clearly see that interpretation B's aim is to get people to pay money to visit Kentwell Hall, and therefore it's always going to have a more positive and kind of rose-tinted view of life in Elizabethan society. So hopefully that answers, or that helps you to work out how you would answer your 12-mark question. 2 paragraphs. The first one, how are they different, using quotes to support, and the second one, why are they different? Finally, we have the 2 20-mark questions, and as stated on the first slide, we know that we only need to answer one of these. So you will always be given a choice of 2 and you select one. So our first question here says, in an article for a British newspaper in 2016, historian John Guy argued that to see Elizabeth as all-powerful is a big mistake. How far do you agree with this view of the power of Elizabeth between 1580 and 1603? For this question, you would need to explain why Elizabeth should not be seen as all-powerful, which links to John Guy's suggestion that this is a big mistake, and why she should be. So you are giving a balanced argument here. Yes, she's all-powerful. No, she's not. The second question says, according to the website elizabethanenglandlife.com, the Elizabethan explorers were successful in exploring distant lands to gain wealth and power. How far do you agree with this view of the achievements of Elizabethan adventurers between 1580 and 1603? So for this question, as much as it's quite lengthy, all the exam board are looking for you to do here is to explain why Elizabethan explorers should be viewed as successful and why they should not be. So again, we're looking for this element of balance, exactly the same as all of the other papers that you will sit in terms of the essay. You have to show this element of balance there. And in this second question, we're looking for why Elizabethan explorers should be viewed as successful and why they should not be. So let's have a look at how to structure this question. First of all, work out what the question is asking you, which you can see in the 2 green boxes above. Only answer one of the options, as I've stated already. You do not use an introduction, exactly the same as public health and your other modules. You do not receive marks for an introduction, so do not waste your time writing one. Ignore who has written the statement or where the exam paper says it is from. So you can see here that they give you the provenance. In an article for a British newspaper in 2016, historian John Guy argued. For the other question, according to the website elizabethanenglandlife.com, you do not need to worry about where these interpretations have been taken from. It is simply there as a requirement by the exam board. They have to give you that information. You're not expected to know who the historian is or what the website is, so please feel free to just ignore that information. You don't need to reference it in your response. What you need to work out is what the question is asking you, which, as I've said, you can see in the green boxes above. For this question, you would need 4 Peel paragraphs, so just a reminder again that that stands for point, evidence, explanation and linking back to the question. And you need to be specific with your evidence, but only include 1 piece per paragraph and fully explain that in reference to the question. Remember, your explanation here is what is going to see you move up the mark scheme. Exactly the same as the public health video that hopefully you've watched. Your judgment here is only worth 1 mark. So you must be on 19 marks to qualify for the judgment mark, and it will need to be a clinching argument. Okay, so we have here, in an article for a British newspaper in 2016, historian John Guy argued that to see Elizabeth as all-powerful is a big mistake. How far do you agree with this view of the power of Elizabeth between 1580 and 1603? So let's have a look at an example paragraph for this particular question. I disagree with the statement, as Elizabeth was very powerful through her control of Parliament. So at this point we've identified something, so we would be awarded 2 marks. So it's an accurate identification. She controlled Parliament well, and therefore she must have been powerful. 2 marks. Elizabeth could veto any law in Parliament so that she could control the laws that she wanted to be passed. Elizabeth also banned certain topics being discussed in Parliament, such as foreign policy, succession and marriage. We've now got some specific evidence, and this would allow us to achieve 4 marks. So we've got specific evidence that supports the fact that she controlled Parliament. Therefore, this made Parliament almost useless in Elizabethan England, as they were seemingly only there to convince people they had power, when, in reality, it was Elizabeth who held it all. So we've got explanation here. Parliament didn't have power, Elizabeth had it all, and we are disagreeing, therefore, with the statement. So this would see us achieve 7 marks. Therefore, Elizabeth would have been seen as all-powerful during this time, proving it is not a big mistake to see her in this way. So that is our link to the question, and at this point we would be on 8 marks. We have a very clear peel structure, our point that she's powerful due to her control from Parliament, our evidence because of veto and banning topics in Parliament, our explanation because Elizabeth held the power, Parliament didn't have any in reality, and our link, literally a direct quote from the question, proving it is not a big mistake to see her in this way. So in terms of how we move up the mark scheme, 1 fully explained peel paragraph for this question would achieve between 5 and 8 marks, 2 would be achieved between 9 and 12, 3 peel paragraphs between 13 and 16, and 4 peel paragraphs between 17 and 19. So the way that we would achieve our final mark, if we had 4 fully explained peel paragraphs that were of similar quality as the same as the one that we've just looked at together, to achieve our 20th mark, we would need a clinching argument or judgment. Something along the lines of, despite the fact that Elizabeth held the most power and other courtiers could not have been powerful without her approval and patronage, overall I agree with the statement, as she relied heavily on a huge range of different people, from privy councillors to ladies in waiting, and therefore it would be wrong to say that she was all powerful. So we've got here a despite judgment, we have acknowledged both sides, and this would see us achieve 20 marks for this clinching argument. So hopefully that has been helpful for how to answer the Elizabethan questions, and the next video will be based around making of America.